Hello, I'm Bo Belcher. The following presentation is about the founding of the Southeast Missouri State University Veterans Corps, more commonly known as the SEMO Vets. The Vietnam era began in 1962, but U.S. involvement actually started years before. We'll touch on the background with a little historical perspective. Thousands of Americans were involved in Vietnam, and thousands more, also in military service, were doing other things throughout the world. By 1967, vets were returning to the world, some returning to college, some were starting their post-high school education for the first time. What all of them had in common was that they were older than the average college student, and they had a different background of experiences. Some of them enrolled at Southeast Missouri State. Ken Burns didn't cover that part.
Thank you, Bo. Mike Beard. I was a veteran out of the Vietnam era, spent my time in Japan, came back to Southeast Missouri State in 1969 and was active with them until I graduated in 1972, and then have been always coming back for homecoming most every year ever since. What a great experience it was. Why are we doing this now, and why are we even doing it at all? Well, first of all, it's our 50th anniversary, as we said, but about 3 or 4 years ago, we got together in St. Charles, Missouri, about 8 or 10 of us, maybe even 15, and as we got towards the end of the afternoon, we got to talking and we went around the room and just kind of people were telling their stories. And they were remarkable stories. To the point that we said, boy, I wish we would have filmed that. Maybe someday we'll get a chance. Today's the chance. I'd like for you to meet the past president of the student body of Southeast Missouri State College, your friend of mine, Mr. Pete Nardi. A retired school teacher from the Kirkwood and Parkway School systems in the St. Louis area, and sort of an historian on the Vietnam War. Was involved in it, a Purple Heart recipient, and once again the past president of the student body of SEMO State College at the time.
That's right.
Pete, welcome. Tell us a little bit about what you did before you got involved in the military and kind of take us on through.
I graduated high school in '64, Kirkwood High, went down to the University of Missouri and promptly flunked out. Started working in a restaurant after that, and the war was starting. This is in the fall of '65. I joined the Marine Corps in November of '65, went to boot camp in February of '66. By August, I was in Vietnam as an infantryman. I made one major infantry operation, and after that, I volunteered into what was called the Combined Action Program, where they would take a squad of Marines and you would live in a village for a year. And we learned the Vietnamese language. We ran ambushes every night. We did civil affairs work every day. I served as a rifleman and a radio operator. We were kind of in the front lines. When most grunts were walking around in the daylight, we were doing civil affairs work. They camped out at night. We started walking around in the dark, and we did a lot of that. We got mortared from time to time. We were trying to do the best we could for the people of Vietnam. And I came home in September of '67. Still had 4 months to do in the Marines. Came down to SEMO in the fall of '68, and my first day on campus, this is a great story. First day on campus, I walked into what was then called Memorial Cafeteria, and I had not shaved or cut my hair since the day I got out of the Marine Corps.
You did have long hair.
I did. I had a ponytail and a rather bushy beard. I was the resident Vet Corps hippie, right. So I walk into the cafeteria, and I put my tray on the little sliding deal there and said I'd like a hamburger, a bowl of chili, and a glass of milk. Lady behind me said, are you a student here? And I said, yes, ma'am, I am. She said, do you have an ID? And I said, yes, ma'am, I do. She said, could I see it? And I gave her my ID, and she put it in her apron. And I said, ma'am, I'm going to need that. I got to get my books, and this first day on campus. She said, she was shaking. She said, I'm really sorry, but we've been ordered not to serve anybody that looks like you. Welcome home.
Welcome home.
So
you've got a couple other good stories about welcome home also.
So I started looking around. I asked somebody, I said, do you know where the vets are? Because I'd heard about the Vet Corps. And they said, yeah, they're at that table right over there. And Harold Detchen, who you'll talk to in a little bit, he was at that table, and I went over, introduced myself, told that story, and they said, follow me, and we went running up the stairs to Dean Walker's office. I'll never forget it. This one guy just walked right by the secretary like a movie. She said, bah, bah. We were right into Dean Walker's office. And the dean says, what now? And I told him, he said, tell him. So I told him. And he goes, oh my God. He goes, I'm sorry. He said, you'll get your ID back. 3 days later, I'm sitting in Dr. Scully's office. And Dr. Scully, the president of the university, I'm on campus now, my 4th day, and I'm already reading the president. He says, I just never thought I'd see a veteran that looked like you. And I went, well, Dr. Scully, get used to it. There's going to be a lot more vets that look like me. And he said, here's your ID. And I said, thank you very much. And got my ID back, and 2 years later, I was president of student body.
You sure were. That just blew me away.
It blew a lot of people away.
The Vets Corps just about had what we wanted at that time, including that.
We did. Yeah. As president of student body, I had a lot of power. I tried not to abuse it too much, but I appointed Jerry Sullivan, who's here. He was the head of the traffic review board. I named the guys that went on to the judicial board who decided who got kicked out of school. Vets never got kicked out of school. I got to appoint or partially appoint the editor of the newspaper. A lot of good stuff. Head of the homecoming,
Right.
the homecoming committee, and so on and so forth. It was an interesting year, and when I took office, this was a pretty conservative place. Girls were not allowed to wear jeans. Girls could not walk into town with slacks or shorts. Girls were locked up at 10:30 at night, and the key system, we put the key system in. We got rid of the dress code. It was interesting times. Really a lot of fun. Oh, very much so. Very much so.
Now, you're pretty much a historian of the Vietnam era. Is there anything you can tell us about that?
Well, I can, Mike. I mean, I've taught American history for 32 years, and I've taught the Vietnam War for 32 years, and probably made a presentation about how we came to Vietnam for 400 times, and I still give presentations to colleges and high schools in St. Louis. Basically, and I don't want to bore everybody to death, but basically, most Americans, when this war started, we didn't know where Vietnam was.
Exactly.
We'd never heard of it. We were mispronouncing the names of the places. You know, we'd see the city away and call it Hue. You know, that sort of thing. Well, Vietnam started as a country maybe 100 years BC. Shortly thereafter, the Chinese took it over, and in about 40 AD, two sisters, Vietnamese sisters, the Trung sisters, started a revolution against the Chinese. It lasted for 400 years. Wow. 400 years of revolution, wow. And they finally kicked the Chinese out. Fast forward to the 1700s, the French start sending missionaries in. The missionaries do one really important thing. They convert the Vietnamese language into the Roman alphabet. They convert a large part of the population to Catholicism. And by the 1860s, the French had complete political, economic, and religious control of the country. The following year, they took over Cambodia. Shortly thereafter, they were given what was called a protectorate, and the whole area was renamed Indochina. Shortly thereafter, a young man was born in central Vietnam named Ho Chi Minh, and he's going to come back more than once. Ho Chi Minh left Vietnam in 1920 and went to the Paris Peace Conference ending World War I. He was there because he believed what Woodrow Wilson said, that countries should have self-determination. He went to the Paris Peace Conference asking for independence for Vietnam, and he was promptly ignored. And for the next 10 years, he visited the United States and then went to study in Moscow and became a confirmed communist. He founded the Vietnamese, the Indo-Chinese Communist Party. And by 1830, he's back in Vietnam. 1939, World War II starts in Europe, and Germany has an ally in Japan. Well, the Germans defeat the French. The Japanese come in and take over the French colony. Ho Chi Minh fought a war against the French and the Japanese with American support. Our OSS, the forerunner of the CIA, helped fight that war. When the war was over, Ho Chi Minh wrote President Truman 5 letters asking for his support for Vietnamese independence. President Truman never got the letters. His advisors said that this guy's a communist and France is our ally. We're not even going to deal with this. So Ho Chi Minh, on September 2nd, 1945, stood in the Hotel de Ville, the City Hall of Hanoi, stood up and he quoted Thomas Jefferson and said, "When in the course of human events, our Declaration of Independence," he quotes us, and declares Vietnamese independence. The French responded with a naval bombardment, and the war was on. They fought for 8.5 years. The French eventually were defeated by the Viet Minh, the Vietnamese opposition, at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. 11,000 French and Vietnamese troops were captured. 2,000 were killed, 4,000 were wounded. But that gave Ho Chi Minh the leverage to say, this is what we want. A peace conference was held in Geneva that was covered by France, Britain, the United States on one side, China, Russia, and Ho Chi Minh on the other side, and they came up with an agreement. The agreement basically says that the country will be divided at the 17th parallel, what all of us know as the DMZ, the demilitarized zone. The northern half will be governed by Ho Chi Minh and the Communist Party with a capital in Hanoi. The southern half will be governed by an emperor who was a French puppet named Bao Jai, and he appointed a prime minister named Ngo Dinh Diem, who is going to be very important. Second and lastly, and their capital would be Saigon. And lastly, an election would be held to unify the country within 2 years. President Eisenhower, by 1956, realized that if there's an election, Uncle Ho's going to win, and that's not what we wanted.
Yeah.
That's not what we wanted. So he canceled the election. The Vietnamese then had the right to say, you've canceled our election, we're going to go to war with you. Well, we supported the French with money, and now we're supporting the Vietnamese in training the new South Vietnamese army, the ARVN, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. We're training them, we're arming them, we're paying for everything, and this is becoming a big deal. Eisenhower leaves office, John F. Kennedy comes in office, and the number of American advisors goes from 700 to 12,000. So we're sending a lot of folks to Vietnam.
They were called advisors?
Advisors, and they're working with the Vietnamese troops. We don't have American ground troops there, but we are sending in helicopters and mechanics, and the Viet Cong, the revolutionaries in the South, the Viet Cong are attacking our air bases. Well, to protect our air bases in March of '65, the Marines land in Da Nang. And the war begins, in essence. I mean, we'd had advisors and so on and so forth, but this is American ground troops. So from 1965 to 1983, the Vietnam War becomes the dominant political focus in the United States. For young people, old people, most of us that are Vietnam vets, our dads were World War II vets. Mm-hmm. And they didn't understand. And this is a different sort of war. You're not marching to Berlin or Hanoi or wherever. We're just trying to, all over the jungle. You couldn't tell the good guys from the bad guys. So for 8 years, 8.5 years, we went to war. And 3 million Americans joined the military. 58,000 of those Americans were killed in action, more than 58,000. 300,000 were wounded. When the war ended in 1973, peace with honor with President Nixon, and that's highly debatable. 1,600 Americans remained missing in action while 800 POWs came home. 2 years after we pulled out, the North Vietnamese attacked the South and steamrolled the South and took over South Vietnam. So for the third time, the Vietnamese people had kicked out an occupier, and a lesson learned.
Lesson learned, yeah, for sure.
That's it.
And so then you came back, and then we came back to Cape, as you said, and got involved with the Vet Corps. And,
I did. I got involved with the Vet Corps by not being able to get a hamburger.
Get that hamburger.
Yeah.
Pretty good reason.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add, Pete? It's been a fantastic
No.
story. And, I talk about you all the time in your yellow VW bus.
I was a resident hippie.
Yeah, you were. We loved it.
So we'll talk more about it in a little bit.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Pete. Appreciate your time.
My time.
Continuing on with our visit, we have a couple more of the SEMO vets with us here this afternoon, Mr. Tom Giles and Mr. Mitch Shelby, longtime friends. Gentlemen, welcome so much. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Let's start off here and just tell me a little bit about what did you do before you went into the military, Tom?
Well, I was actually a student at SEMO. I started the fall semester of 1962 after graduation from high school. And at the end of my fourth year of college, the draft board said college deferments are 1 year and are for 4 years only, and the draft notice came very shortly thereafter. Well, I had already enrolled in the summer semester, so I did appeal it, and they did give me another deferment. So I thought I was in good shape. I didn't need but just a very few hours to graduate. But at the end of the summer semester, immediately the draft notice appeared again. So I appealed it again, and they said, no, you've had 4 years, you're supposed to graduate. So I knew that I was being drafted. I had my draft notice in my hand, and I had talked to the draft board, and they definitely had said, no, you're going to go into service. Well, the Air Force recruiter was just down the street, and on a whim, I just walked in there and said, I'm interested in seeing what you have to offer. So we got to talking, and he said, well, you've actually been drafted. And I said, yes. And he said, well, I can't talk to you. But he said, while you're here, take the test. So I took the test, and then after the test, he said, well, wait a minute, why would I talk to you just a bit? So anyway, I left, I joined the Air Force, spent 4 years with the Air Force. When I got out, I needed the fall semester of 1970 is when I came back to school. The school was going to start before I got out, so I had to appeal for an early out. And I had
to do an awful lot of appealing.
I'll never forget, because I had to actually go see the base commander where I was stationed at the time to get permission, and they were really nice to me. They let me out 2 days early, so I had enough time to drive to Cape and enroll in college. So
they were nice to you. Yeah.
So then I spent a year at SEMO. I finally graduated in the summer semester of 1971.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Mitch, I know you're an old New Madrid. What is the New Madrid? What was New Madrid? Your high school mascot.
Well, when I first started New Madrid, they were New Madrid Owls, and then they consolidated, and then they became the New Madrid Indians.
New Madrid Indians, consolidated.
And
you were a big basketball star there, weren't you?
Well, I played basketball. You may be stretching the part about the star. Only my wife thinks that.
That's right. Well, tell us about pre-college and pre-military.
Well, I graduated from high school in '64 with intentions of going to Memphis State University. When I got there, of course, I had to pay my own way. I didn't have any financial support, so I worked a semester, went to school a semester, worked a semester, went to school a semester, and at that time, Uncle Sam said, no, Mitch, you can't do that. We have a better idea for you. So I was drafted in the summer of '66 into the Army.
Yep.
And at age 20, that's where I was.
All right, good. So then you went, where'd you spend your military time, Tom?
I spent 18 months in the Philippines, and then I don't know if you remember when the Pueblo incident happened in Korea. I was on a mobility team with a fighter squadron, and we were sent to Suwon, Korean Air Force Base, and I spent some time there. Then I finished my service in Omaha, Nebraska, at SAC headquarters in Omaha.
I was getting ready to come home from Japan when the Pueblo crisis happened, and I thought I was going to get to stay a little longer, but it subsided pretty fast, so I came on home. How about you, Mitch? Where'd you end up?
Well, I did my basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, and I breezed through that. I was in pretty good condition at that time.
How like now?
A lot, about 100-pound difference.
Okay.
But then I went to Fort Polk for my advanced infantry training, and from there in January of '67, I was sent to Vietnam with the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. And there we had several pretty big operations, like the Iron Triangle, Shenandoah 1, Shenandoah 2, the Fuloy Death March. Basically, while we were there, it was search and destroy. We pulled ambushes at night. In the daytime, we humped it and dug in at night. Covered a foxhole up the next morning and took off again. And I was basically a squad leader most of that first year. And when I left there, I was a Sergeant E5 and went from Vietnam to Fort Knox, Kentucky. That's where I finished my last 6 months, and that's where I discharged out, was from Fort Knox.
So you spent a year in country then, in Vietnam, on the ground?
On the ground in Vietnam, yeah.
Difficult time.
Yep.
Difficult time. So after you finish the military, you come back to Cape. You're coming home, and you're coming back to Southeast Missouri. So tell us a little bit about when you got back to Cape. What did you see and what happened?
Well, the first thing I did was go to the college campus, and I guess at the library when I was picking up my books, the first people I saw were representatives from the Vets Corps, and was signed up real quick, and that was a great thing because immediately I had a group of friends on campus, and it worked out real well.
Good. Same story?
Yeah, pretty much like Tom. I came back to Cape Girardeau and enrolled at Southeast Missouri State. My roommate was already in the Vet Corps, and he encouraged me to join the Vet Corps, and I did, which was a great move because of the able to bond with the people that had the same background and so forth.
Right.
And the Vet Corps, gosh, was so great. We did so many things. The intramurals, you know, we did everything. If they had it, we did it.
And we won it.
And we won it. Yeah, we were pretty, and I remember you were pretty good at almost everything.
Well, I don't know
we
about
did.
that, but
Well, we had some good athletes
we
in
had
the
some
Vet
darn
Corps.
good athletes.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
major things, you know, we had the pig roast every year was a big deal. We did a lot of social activities. It was just a great brotherhood developed between the vets, a relationship that we keep the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
And as we found out today, we meet some of the people we haven't seen in several years, and it's nice to get back together.
Here we are almost 50 years later.
All right.
Yeah, amazing. It's been good. Life's been good to us, and appreciate you guys' time. Anything else you'd like to add?
Looking
No,
forward
just
to this weekend
This
and homecoming.
weekend, yeah,
Yes.
homecoming,
Yeah.
yeah.
I just say that when I think about Southeast Missouri State, the thing that comes to my mind almost always first is the Vet Corps. That was a big deal in my life as a student at SEMO, and continues to be.
Continues to be. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate your time.
Thank
Mike.
you.
You know, as you go through life, you have an opportunity to meet people that you'd never thought you would have met in any shape, form, or fashion. You come back home from the service, you come up to a community where you've been very little in your life, and you run into a bunch of people that not only do you have a great time with when you're there, but hell, some of them become lifelong friends. That's what we got right here, right now. Mr. Tom Hahn, Mr. Lou Ferretti, Mr. Larry DeClue. Fantastic people. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you all for coming and joining us today. Larry?
You're welcome.
You and your wife and my first wife and everybody got together a long time ago and used to have an awful lot of fun. Tell us about before you got into the military. What were you doing before then?
I worked in St. Louis. Back, well, in '61, I started SEMO, went one semester and decided that wasn't what I wanted to do. And then went to St. Louis, was drafted in 1966, and was talked into taking an extra year, which I did, and was discharged from the Army in '69. I had orders to go to Vietnam. However, those were changed, and I ended up in the construction engineers in Korat, Thailand. That was a good assignment, and I didn't have to go to Vietnam.
Didn't have to
That
go to
was
Vietnam, yeah.
good for me.
Yeah. Well, some of the other ones did, and Mr. Ferretti, you spent a little time in country over there. Tell us a little bit about before you got into the military and how did you get into the military?
Well, I started at SEMO in 1965 out of high school. Went 4 years and got a 4-year deferment. And when my 4 years were up, I was drafted. Went through training, Fort Benning, Fort Polk, back to Fort Benning, and then to Vietnam. And I was in the 7th Cavalry, 1st Air Cav, Air Mobile. And I was first in the mortar platoon, then I was the company clerk, and then I was my company commander's radio operator in the bush in Vietnam in the infantry company. Spent most of my college career at SEMO, the first part trying to stay out of the military. But you know, they started the peace talks in '68, but that didn't work out. And when I came back to SEMO, I had known some vets before I left, Mike Patton and a few others. And so I went right over and joined the Vets Corps and became, I remember the first meeting, they said, does anyone want to be social chairman? Nobody volunteered, so I went down to Jim Mayer and said, I'll do that. That's right up my alley. Yeah. So I was social chairman 1 year and then treasurer the next year. And then the next year after that, I was elected with Jim Mayer to the NACV, National Association of Collegiate Veterans. Yeah. We went to Washington, D.C. and lobbied for the Vietnam GI Bill.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that. I'm anxious to hear more about that.
Jim can tell you a lot
Tell us a
more.
little bit what, from your viewpoint of that. Tell us a little bit about that. That was a big deal at that time.
Yeah, Mike Patton was president the year before I got there, and he was president of the National Association. And then he got Jim and I involved, and we went to a convention in Duluth, Minnesota, and we were both elected office. Jim was elected president, and I was elected vice president of membership.
Yeah.
I want to say one thing about the Vets Corps. When I got back, before I went in SEMO, before I went in the Army and I was at SEMO, I was fairly popular, but didn't really belong to anything. But when I got back, immediately accepted by the SEMO vets. I think there was no pledgeship, there was no voting you in or out. If you were a vet, you were in. I think we even took reserve people, didn't we?
I think so, yeah.
I think so. So there was no,
We used to make fun of them a little bit, but
Well,
we
that's
did
true,
take
too.
the reserves.
That's true. So, and it was an immediate camaraderie. I mean, as social chairman, we had the Christmas parties, and we had homecoming. We had
The dance in the basement down beneath, what was the name of that place? And down on Broadway.
Toga party.
Palladium, yeah, underneath the Palladium.
and also Youngster football game, and it all culminated in the spring with the annual pig roast, which everyone could come to. They bought a ticket.
And they did.
Yeah. And we had how many pigs did we cook?
I don't know. There's pictures floating around out there right now that a whole pickup truck load of them. The health department would have arrested every one of us today.
And we had a
Nasty looking.
and we had a band that was out in the country usually, and so we had a pretty good time.
Tom, we mentioned a while ago about we had some pretty good athletes. And in my opinion, arguably at that time, you might have been the #1 athlete on the campus. Every sport we played, you were the quarterback or something on everything. You even talked us into playing power volleyball, and no one even knew how to spell it. And we started playing power volleyball. Tell us the story about Tom Hahn.
Well, I joined the Navy Reserves when I was in high school. When I was a junior, I was in the reserves for 2 years. As soon as I graduated from high school, I joined on my 18th birthday. Went in the Navy at Columbia Naval Air Station for 3 years. I got out on my 21st birthday. Immediately, as soon as I could, I came down here and joined the Vets Corps, which was the best thing to happen to me. Enjoyed the heck out of it, and still consider all these guys my best friends.
Exactly. Do you have any special experiences in the military you want to share with us?
No, not really.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Just glad it's
I
over.
mean, I was
you never
stationed
know.
up by Chicago. We never got bombed or anything.
You did a good job,
I guess
then,
we
didn't
did a
you?
pretty good job. Then as far as the sports,
Yeah,
we always had a good team.
yeah.
Fraternities didn't like us because we usually beat them. But you had to realize, we were 3 years older. We were men and they were still boys.
And we had 300 members.
We had quite a few members, but we did well in all of it.
Very good.
I will say in 1971, we won the all-school flag football, fleet ball they called it, and we also won the all-school overall trophy in intramurals because we won in every sport.
Every sport, yeah. Remember
Tom
that
was a
well?
big part of it.
Big part of it, yeah. Gentlemen, anything else you'd like to share with the viewers?
I would like to talk a little bit about the Vets House.
Please,
Oh,
please
God.
do that. Yeah, definitely.
Not that we
was-
had much going on out there,
Yeah,
but
just every Friday.
we had I think originally we had more beer sold out there or given out there than the taverns did down in town. And Thelonious was a big part of that. Took care of us pretty well, gave us a stainless steel cooler with 3 tappers. We had mulligan stews out there. We won't go into that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I like the picture
Tackle
in the
football
yearbook
game.
was us up on top of the house.
Right.
Our parents were
Exactly.
all over it. Yeah, that was a neat picture
so
in the
we,
yearbook.
we really had a good time. We did a lot of good things for the college too, so they liked us.
Yeah, we behaved ourselves pretty well.
I remember the pig roast got rained out, and the one year they moved it out to where I was staying at the House of David. And Dean Walker
that work?
came out. Well, Dean Walker came out
It worked real well,
and
didn't it?
asked us to quiet it down a little bit because the people were complaining 3 blocks away because we had a live band down in the basement. Cars were parked all over the neighborhood. So, but no, we had a good time.
Yep. Hollywood, if it's Hollywood, we're taking the contract.
That's right.
All right.
That's my agent, I
That's
think.
your agent, yeah.
Yep.
All right. Anything else anybody
Should
want
be
to say?
home.
It's a good way to end
I
it.
would like to thank the media people
Oh,
here
very much so, yes.
for doing such a great job
Yes,
and
media.
doing this for us. And you and Bo and Tom for getting this thing started. And
I might say something about the pig roast.
Please do.
You mentioned how many pigs we've done over the years. Whenever I started in '70, I don't remember exactly where the first one was. I think it was at Lake Girardeau. And then in '71, we went to different locations about every year. Trail of Tears State Park and Painton Park, which was, I think was our biggest one.
That's
I think
where
it
we-
was in '72. And at that time, we had a big, long grill, and we had 16 half hogs that we cooked that particular day. And I think our membership was something like between 200 250 people at that time, and we had
Quite a
big
party.
crowd.
It definitely was. A lot of pictures are going around out on Facebook about them now. They bring back some very fond memories.
Yes, it
with
does.
the incredible stretching man.
There you go.
We had a
Three-legged race.
Three-legged race. Thanks to Mr. Mayor.
Tug of war, the
Tug
egg
of war,
toss.
Egg toss.
Yeah, and we even had a streaker.
That's
We
right.
had a streaker back in the
And
day.
he's not here right
He
now,
didn't
is he?
make it. He didn't streak in this time.
Well, I like
Okay,
to thank
John.
everybody. I'm looking forward to the weekend.
Fantastic. Thank you all, gentlemen. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Michael.
Every organization has a beginning, and sometimes you join these organizations, you never have a chance to get to know who really started and what their thought processes were when they did it. We're lucky enough here today to have two of the co-founders of the Vets Corps, XGI, Chi Gamma Iota, Harold Detchen, and Pete Nardy's back to talk to us again. Harold, I understand you were the main man on pulling the trigger on this thing, getting it started.
I don't want to take all the credit for
Oh,
that,
go
Mike.
ahead.
You know what? I'm too modest.
Too
But
modest.
I'm way too modest. But I will give Dan Piper and Harold Hawkins and Ted Woodruff a lot of credit for that. I was walking to Memorial Hall one day in '67, and I had a fatigue jacket on, and these guys were sitting there drinking coffee, and they motioned me over and said, "Were you in the service?" And I says, "Well, yes, I was." And that's how that started.
That's how it
So,
started. Yeah. So you told a little bit about your military experience.
Yes, actually, I joined the military. I joined the Marine Corps right out of high school in 1962, and I wasn't drafted. I joined, and I knew I wanted to go in because I come from a long line of military
Yeah, really?
people in my family. My dad was in World War I, so you can see I was one of the youngest in the family, but I had two brothers in World War II, two in Korea, and three of us were Marines afterwards.
Was your whole family a Marine?
No, they were all mainly Army, but three of us were Marines. But I joined in '62, right after high school. So I went to boot camp at Camp Pendleton and San Diego, and I had seagoing for 2 years on an aircraft carrier, which was luxurious duty. I mean, it was Hollywood Marine. You know, you wore dress blues and
Really?
saluted sailors, you know, and pretty much what it was. You could salute a second lieutenant, and you could salute a lieutenant in the Navy lieutenant, and he wouldn't know the difference. So, yeah, but that's the way
That's
it is.
okay. It's a good story.
It's a good story.
Yeah, all
but
right, yeah.
after seagoing, I went back to the grunts in Camp Pendleton and went to 1st Recon Battalion, and from then on it was Okinawa for training, and we landed in July in May of 1965.
Okay.
We already were on boots on the ground in 1965 was the 1st Marine Division. So recon, each Marine Division had one battalion of reconnaissance, and we were the eyes and ears of the division. Send you out on patrols to gather information. We were only out there with 8, 10, 12 people. You know, that's all we had, and we slept in the daytime. We moved at night. That's the way they did. So we were to gather information, bring it back to division, to go through the area, give them information as to if there was a sweep going through there. We had, you know, and we primarily patrolled and kept an eye on which was, I don't know who coined the phrase, but the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which came out of Laos and Cambodia and then snuck into Vietnam. how were these people getting these weapons they got? Well, Chinese and Russia was supplying them with the weapons.
They're on that trail.
They were on that trail, but it was all traveled at night, not in the daytime. They were farmers in the daytime, but at night
Couldn't tell the difference, could you?
could not, and that was very frustrating. So I spent 13 months down in Nam and got discharged out of there. I actually got extended down there involuntarily because there weren't enough people coming in to fill our billets. So I put in 4 extra months. So.
And then came back to Cape and back to school. Are you from this area?
I'm from Perryville, actually. I grew up in Perryville. I worked for a year in St. Louis in construction work and got married. And my wife was a kind of a, I wouldn't say a driving force, but she always said, you always wanted to go to college. So I came down here in 1967. She already had her RN degree, so I said, let's go.
All
So
right.
67 is when I started, and that's when we formed the Vets Corps.
Okay. And it was the 4 of you guys kind of got together and just said we need to start just hanging out together?
Well, it was, Mike, I look at a lot of Vietnam veterans. We came home alone. I hate to, I don't know if I can coin that phrase or not, but nobody wanted nothing to do with us. We were kind of left out here in no man's land, and it was Hawkins and Piper, Dan, they got together. We ought to form something here. And Hawkins came up with the name Vets Corps, and he knew a person down at Screen Arts that made the crest for us.
Right.
And I remember, when the T-shirts came back, there was one of them that was upside down. Well, how can you tell a Greek letter if it's upside down? So I took that one and wore it all through 4 years of school upside down. Nobody ever noticed any difference. XGI upside down, what does it say?
Chi Gamma Iota.
I don't know, but we decided that we were not going to join a fraternity. Nobody was going to do that, and we formed this organization to actually for academic help one another. I remember Hajiman Brown, the Oriental guy that was our sergeant at arms, had tutored me through algebra. I mean, that's how we helped each other.
And back just like while you were still in the military.
Sure, yeah, and it was, we were a group then. We were a group of people, we belonged to one another. And hence it grew and grew and grew, but I think it was a very neat thing that...
Pete, now you came in the second year.
I did. Well, Harold and Hawk and Piper and those guys, they started in the fall of 67.
Yeah.
And I enrolled in the fall of 68. So I think they might have had 15, 16, 18 guys. And the fall of 68, Han and me and a bunch of other guys, and the population of the club grew. And Larry was talking about by the end of it was 250. I can remember Dean Walker saying there's over 400 vets on campus. And one of the things that's little known is of all the organizations, the fraternities basically, and us, we had the highest grade point average.
Really?
You know, I mean, a lot of us
didn't help that any.
I think I did.
Yeah.
Oh, well, congratulations.
Well, I came down here. I had a sterling .56 from Mizzou.
Thank you.
And
You're rocking.
And .56. And but I was on the dean's list for 4 semesters. You know, I mean, it was that kind of thing. The school was good for us, but we were good for the school. Yeah. And the school bent over backwards because while we had our moments, with the vet house and things like that. We attended class pretty regularly. We did well. We participated in everything on campus. When I was elected president of the student body, over 10% of the student senate was vets. It was a scratch my back, scratch your back kind of relationship with the school. And when they realized what good citizens we were, they started advertising in Navy Times and Army Times, and we had vets come from Pennsylvania and California because it was inexpensive, $100 a semester.
Remember that.
And they give you your books.
And I couldn't afford it then.
No, we're getting $110 to go to college.
Yeah.
If you got married, your wife was worth 45. You know, jumped it up to
Yet another
155.
reason.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it was, as several people have said around here, this school was perfect for us. It really was. We glommed onto each other. I never met anybody from Perryville till I met Harold.
Yep.
You know, I mean, and there are people from all over the state of Missouri and other states as well that went to school here, and it was just a fabulous experience. And you know, most of us got complete degrees, great careers, wonderful pensions or retirements today. We're happy and healthy and wonderful friends. You just can't beat it. And it was just one of the greatest experiences of all of our lives, I think.
I'd like to share one story if I may. And Harold, you had mentioned it, and a couple others have mentioned it. When we came back home in 67 and 68 and 69, we were alone. I mean, people did not like the Vietnam veterans at all. Pete, about 5 or 6 years ago, we came down and we walked in the parade. And I brought a large flag down that I have with us again for tomorrow, or Saturday. And you were carrying that flag with us that day. And I've told this story many times, and I hope I'm not too far off, but you broke down in tears that day.
Well,
can you?
yeah, nobody had ever said thank you.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to hear.
Nobody
you say.
had ever said thank you to me. Not my parents, not my siblings, not my high school friends. And as we walked down Broadway, and there were 25 or 30 of us carrying that flag, from all walks of life, all ethnicities and religions, and we were just all vets. And not all combat vets. I mean, a lot of guys, you know, some guys played softball for 3 years, or, you know,
Or
that sort of
basketball.
thing. Or basketball, or
And I was damn
whatever,
good,
you know, or, you know. But people on both sides of Broadway,
Yeah.
thank you, thank you, thank you. And I did. I had tears streaming
I know
down
you
my
did.
face.
I
And
remember that.
Nobody had ever said that to me before.
Well, I think what Pete's referring to also is coming back, the protests were going on in this country, which when I was over there, we didn't know anything about that. And I got bits and pieces of that when I hit St. Louis. There were some derogatory remarks made of us, and they were throwing a little piece of gravel at us, you know, calling us names. And I thought, what's going on around here, you know? There was a good article written in the American Legion magazine here a while back. We didn't really ask for a parade, but we wanted a little bit of respect is what we were really looking for. You know, don't throw us out with the dishwater, you know. And I think when Pete mentioned when we had that in 06, you know, people finally realized that, you know, the flag does mean something. And actually, we're going through another turmoil right
terrible
now,
turmoil,
the flag, so that's another story to cover, but
Well, we're going to get them to stand up again Saturday when we go through into the parade and
they
carry
will.
the flag again.
We will. You know, I mean,
Gentlemen-
one of the things that was good for the Vets Club, though, is there were guys in the Vets Corps that were against the war, or just thought it wasn't worth any more American blood, or, you know, wrong war against the wrong people in the wrong place. And there were guys that thought we should fight this war all the way to Hanoi. And one of the things that, it wasn't a written rule. I mean, we didn't have any written rules that I know of, or bylaws or anything like that. I don't know. But we just made it a thing. You just don't talk politics about the war. I mean, you want to talk about who you're voting for and stuff like that, that's a different sort of thing. But we're not going to get into it. You know, we were just there for each other to make friends and to socialize and so on and so forth. And it worked out great. It really did work out great.
a lot of us, you know, we didn't talk about it much when we came back, and we started. I think I mentioned to Tom Hahn here a while back. I used to never have a sense of humor like that, but when I came back, you had to have a little sense of humor and laugh about some things because you can't remember. You know, you don't want to remember what you left, and it has carried on. You know, during the Vets Corps there, that it was the most fun organization I have ever been a part of, and like I think people mentioned, some of my closest friends at the, you know, we're in the Vets Corps.
All right. Gentlemen, anything else?
That's it.
Thank you so very much for having the foresight to come up with this idea, grab onto it, and keep it running. And as the rest of us came along, with your support and everything was greatly appreciated, and quite a leadership example. Thank you.
That's what we're here for.
That's what you're here for. Well, we continue it on now with another old friend of mine that has got quite a story for us. When he first came back to Cape Girardeau, when I first met him, he was just learning how to walk, and I remember watching him learn how to skip for the first time down the Bart Smitty's. That's one of my first memories of Mr. Jim Mayer. Jim, welcome. Thank you for your service, and tell us a little bit about your life coming up before the military and then when you got to Cape.
Well, I graduated from Cape in '68 before I went into the military. And something occurred when I was a senior that I always remembered the Vets Corps about. It was the era of protests, and there was a small SDS, Students for Democratic Society chapter, of about 9 people that formed. And they announced in the Memorial Cafeteria in '68 that they were going to take the flag down by Academic Hall to half-mast to protest the war. And I watched the Vets Corps guys get up from the table, and there was some football players joined them. They did a circle around them and didn't threaten anybody, just said, this is not a good idea. And I after getting out of the Army, I came back to Cape for my 2nd degree. I immediately sought out the Vets Corps, and I'm here to tell you that my 1.5 years with the Vets Corps really not only gave me lifetime friendships, but really shaped me as a person.
Wow. Your story is remarkable. Tell us about what happened to you in Nam. Do you mind sharing that?
Well, I was an infantryman. I had volunteered. I wasn't drafted. I was only in combat for 2 months, and I was on left point flank as we were moving into some wooded areas, and I stepped on a landmine and lost both my legs below the knee.
Below the knee.
Yeah.
Remarkable story about when you did come back. You were able to walk. You had your prosthetics, and
Yeah.
And you've been walking on them obviously your entire life. Any thoughts, comments about that? I know you've been active with other wounded veterans throughout time. It's obviously much easier to empathize with them when you had the same experience. Share that some of that with us, please.
It is, but it all comes back to what are you going to do with your life? And I survived for a reason. I better find out the reason. And when I was in the Vets Corps, Mike Patton, really, who's been mentioned before, Mike became president of our Missouri State Collegiate Veterans Clubs. He became national president of the National Association of Collegiate Veterans, brought Lou Ferretti and I into the fold, encouraged us to run for national office. 4 of us in 1972 were at a convention in Duluth, Minnesota, and the 4 of us said, you elect us, we're going to move to DC, open an office, and lobby full-time for better readjustment benefits and try to return Vietnam vets' benefits to some par of prior generations. And we were successful at it.
Yeah. So how long were you in D.C. doing this?
2 years for me. Yeah.
And then
none of us were on salary.
You were there on your own?
None, on our own.
On your own. And you lobbied and got things done.
Yeah, well, when we showed up, we had that one page about how a bill becomes law. And
good luck.
And it really wasn't true. It was just a continuing circle. We were really lucky. Some staff and members of the House Veteran Affairs Committees and the Senate Veteran Affairs Committee kind of took a liking to us. I think because, one, we always did our homework about what we were testifying about. But more importantly, we took no stand on foreign policy, no stand on the war. There were plenty of organizations, any Vietnam vet or Vietnam era vet could join to express those. All we were about was, hey, we're not getting the benefits that were provided after World War II. We're being provided less benefits from the Korean War veterans. And so we want to do something about it. And then we also were the first national organization to testify that post-traumatic stress disorder was a reality, and it had to be addressed and counseling had to be available.
And that,
and that turned out to be a 10-year fight to get PTSD recognized.
Right. And now it's kind of common in the people coming back today, but it was at that time as well, wasn't it? Just wasn't diagnosed nor taken care of.
Yeah.
How long did the organization continue on, the National Veterans?
NACV was around until 1976 and folded into another group called National Association of Veteran Program Administrators, school officials, student veterans offices. Okay. That's what it folded into. Interesting story about that is, even though we didn't have any money, in 1973, the Congress passed a law, $25 million to support student veterans offices on campuses. The Nixon administration had a new policy called impoundment. Yes, Congress appropriated money, but we're not going to spend it. We're going to impound it. We sued. And we got representation free from Ralph Nader's Public Citizen Group.
Okay.
And we won.
And one.
And we won. And that $25 million was released.
Released and spent.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Then you went to work for the VA, didn't you? Shortly
Yeah, I did.
thereafter?
Right in 1974, I went to work for the
And what
VA.
was your job there?
I started out at the top and I
Worked your way
my
down? It didn't take you long either, did it?
I was a special assistant for Vietnam Veteran Affairs for the administrator of the VA, Richard Rodebush, under the Republican administration. I was not a career employee. I was a political appointee. But then the Democrats won the election. President Carter came in. He made Max Cleland, 34 years old, triple amputee, head of the VA. Max not only kept me on, he made me his executive assistant.
All right, yeah. And where did that go from there?
Then the Republicans won, and some people I used to know came back on the transition team, said, "You made it through 2 administrations, you're not making it through 3." But they said, if you can find a career job in the VA, we will not veto it. And I found a career job. in the
And
VA.
ended up retiring from there. And,
I did, but I had a 5-year break. I worked for Paralyzed Veterans of America for 5 years.
Now, you do a lot of volunteering in D.C. We hear about you every once in a while, and we're extremely proud of you. Tell us about some of the things you volunteer with, please. I know you're very humble, and you don't like to talk about it, but please, we need to know this because you've received a national award from one of these organizations. Please.
Well, you're talking about the Home for Unwed Mothers?
Yes, well, yeah, the home for... If you haven't realized it before, you can't get a serious answer out of this dude, okay?
We can edit that out. Thanks. But
Please.
Yeah, I and others have gotten some more than our share of recognition. But it's the work I did as a volunteer going to Walter Reed and Bethesda National Naval Medical Center, visiting the newly wounded, injured, or ill and their families and being assistance to them. When I retired from the VA, I started when I was in the VA. I retired in 2007, went immediately worked part-time for Wounded Warrior Project, and that was my full-time job, being in the hospital. We also, a good friend of ours who owned a steakhouse in DC, we started Friday night steak dinners. And it started out with 10 people attending, and it grew to 120 in 2 months, every Friday night. Those dinners are part of the Alethea Foundation, which I still volunteer for. And 2 days ago, we hit our 14-year anniversary of doing those free dinners.
How cool.
Yeah.
Well, now they called you the Milkshake Man at one time, and I still yet see your email address has got Milkshake Man on there. And that went back to your visits with Walter Reed, wasn't it?
Yeah, when I started January '91 as a volunteer at Walter Reed, it's kind of it's a difficult story to tell. But the first amputee that he took me to visit, a colonel took me, basically said on the way to the room, he said, "I want you to be prepared that this young soldier, he was 19 years old, and he was they were moving out of Germany to go to Saudi Arabia, and they had their Bradley war machines on flatbed trains in Germany. They're electrified. That's their power. Well, it arced, came through, head, face, knocked both legs out, traumatic brain injury, vision impaired." He said, "You just got to be prepared." We just call him PJ. Basically, the Army got him back here quick so his parents could see him before he passes. And I go, this is my first. And much to my surprise, PJ, although he was in a lot of pain, was very friendly and made a request. He wanted a poster of Madonna. I went out and bought it that night.
Poster
and
of Madonna?
I was driving back to the hospital, and I saw a McDonald's across the street, and I said, "Well, I bet a milkshake." And he loved that milkshake, and I started, every time I came to Reed, I brought tons of milkshakes. And that's how I got the nickname.
Named the Milkshake Man.
Yeah.
Remarkable story. Take us back to the Vet Corps for just a moment.
By the way,
okay, go
PJ
ahead.
lived.
PJ, I'm sorry, I should
He
have asked
lived.
that. PJ lived.
And he's got kids, and
Really?
he's very happily married, and he's doing well.
Yeah, I'm sure you see him every once in a while.
I do.
Yeah, how neat. That's
Went
neat.
skiing with him.
Went skiing with him, and he had all those problems that he's skiing.
Yeah, he did.
And you're skiing.
Well, I skate a lot.
Skate a lot. Okay. Take us back to SEMO and the Vets Corps for a minute, because I know you were here for a year and a half, but it seemed like you were here the whole time all of us were here, because everybody has a fond memory of Jim Mayer. What's one of your fondest memories of the SEMO Vets Corps?
well, the friendships, the sense of humor, the wit, the camaraderie. If things weren't going really well, somebody'd end up talking about how you doing. People had your back, and you could be yourself. And I just love that. But of all the things I remember, why I remember this, I don't know. I was walking with a cane then. And Tom Hahn talked me into being a pitcher for the softball team. And when I would bat, they would give me a designated runner. He'd be behind the catcher, and Tom insisted one day, he said, it's a violation of rules, you got to run. He says, don't worry about it. I'll be right here on the way to first with your cane. And man, I crushed one, and he ran backwards all the way to
All
first
the way
base.
to first
Yeah.
base.
So I've never spoken to Tom since.
What a story.
One more story about the cane.
Tell me 100.
We used to,
Love
I don't
them
know
all.
how this started, but we got into this thing about declaring a night or an event as a memorable event.
Okay.
And it would be notched on my cane.
Okay.
And when I stopped using my cane, the notches were like 1/3 of my cane.
Memorable
event,
events.
yeah.
And probably many different things that some of them possibly can't be talked about today.
Luckily, my senior memory has erased a lot of them.
All right. Jim, thank you so very much. I love you to
Thank you,
death,
Mike.
partner.
Love you, buddy.
As we continue talking with members of the Vets Corps from back in the late 60s and early 70s, we have with us today Jerry, and he's a past president, and you said you joined us in what year was it, Jerry?
I came to SEMO in 1970.
1970. So before you came to SEMO, tell us what you did before that.
Well, I attempted to complete college at Mizzou about 3 different times. And like Pete mentioned, his experience was they decided they didn't want me after about 3 tries.
Okay.
And my grade point average, I think, was a little better than Pete's, but not much. It was about a 1.5, something
So
like that.
you didn't help the Vets Corps?
No, well,
on that
I
list.
did when I got to the
Once you
Vets
got
Corps,
here.
but no, not before that. No, I wasn't a particularly good student back before before the Vets.
So you went to the military in what year?
I went to the military in '66. I was in the Air Force. Volunteered because the draft was on my tail, and I knew that I might as well get in there. And I figured that the Air Force might be a little safer than pounding the ground over in Vietnam. But when I went in, the Air Force at that time was having 4-week basic training because they wanted bodies. So my basic training was quick. And then I went to tech school, and from there I started basic training in Texas, then I went to Turkey for a 1.5 years, and then back to Texas to finish out my time.
All right. Then when you got out of the military, you came back to Cape at that time?
Got an early out by 2 or 3 months to go back to school. Came to Cape purely by accident. A friend of mine at home, home's around near Troy, Missouri, and a friend of mine at home had said, man, I've been to school down there in, he said Southwest Missouri. I thought he said Southeast Missouri. So when I came back, I went to Southeast Missouri. I'd never been to Cape in my life. Walked onto campus the first day, found an apartment, got enrolled in classes, went to a Vets party, got thrown in jail that night, got bailed out by Bill Bosler, who was the Vets treasurer at the time, and I've been in the Vets, was in the Vets ever since then.
Any of your favorite stories about your time with the Vets?
Well, a couple. The Vets House, I haven't heard very many people talk about the Vets House, but the Vets House was the center of activities every Friday and Saturday for all the time I was here anyway. And the Vets House was mainly a place to you got a ticket for like a dime or something, and that would buy you a beer. So, for 10 tickets, you were a mess.
You're gonna have a good time.
That's right. So, we played a lot of fuzzball. We played all kinds of athletic events and just sat around and yacked and drank and had a good time. Somebody mentioned Hahn being a good athlete. I think the first time he ever hit a golf ball was out at the Vets House. And I saw him hit the golf ball, and I thought he was going to kill somebody in the neighboring field. I mean, that thing shot out of there like a rocket. And I don't know that he'd ever hit a golf ball before in his life, but he could do anything with Pool table, didn't make any difference. Football, he was just a really good athlete. Fun to watch.
Yeah.
Also wanted to mention Smitty's. We had a gathering place in town, Smitty's Bar, corner of Sprigg and Broadway. Almost any day, any evening, you'd find vets in there, and almost exclusively vets. I mean, there were a few other people that hung around there, but mostly it was the vets that were in Smitty's. Played pool, drank some beer, had a good time, yacked,
Right.
carried on. Took good care of each other.
Right.
Did that all the time, I think. One of the other stories about the house, we added a porch. We had a porch on the house, but as we grew, there was 200 and some odd vets in the Vets Corps. When I became president, I think in '72, we had about 212 members, and there were like 600 vets on campus. And we were too big for that little house that we had, and so we decided we'd add a porch. And we acquired the materials for the porch and went out and added it on, but it never did show up as a bill anywhere, so I'm not real sure how we acquired
But we
that.
acquired the lumber somewhere.
We acquired the
Had
lumber
plenty
somewhere.
of back labor, or strong
That's
arms
right.
to hammer
We
with,
did.
but needed
We did.
material.
The other thing I wanted to mention is I lived, and several of the guys, I know Nardi lived upstairs over on Lorimer Street. There were lots of vets that lived on Lorimer Street, particularly in Dolores Luton's apartments over there. I know in the place that we lived, there were at least 5 members of the Vets Corps that had gone in and out, maybe 6 or 7 had gone in and out of that particular apartment. And it was just a good gathering place for the vets to they got taken care of pretty well. We had breakfast club and all kinds of good things going on over there. But most of us, I don't know about most of us, several of us also had a part-time job, and the part-time job was at the Cape Transit Company, which was just a couple of blocks away there from where we lived. And we drove school buses morning and night. I did for probably all the time that I was at SEMO. And one particular time, the bus company was really good to us. They'd take good care of us. And I asked if we could borrow a bus. We wanted to borrow a bus and go by Towers and see if we could pick up some girls and take them out to the vet's house on a Friday evening. And we did do that. And as it turned out, we landed all of 3 girls on this bus.
3 girls.
3 girls. And I think one of them knew a vet. That was the only reason they got the other 2 to come along. Well, we took them out there, and then I took the bus back. Well, they had to find a way home. And it turns out that one of those girls is my current wife now of 45 years.
Is that right?
That's right. Joan Albright at the time.
Albright.
And I took her home that evening and started a
Fell in love.
love
So you
affair.
found her on a school bus going to the Vets Corps
That's
picnic,
right.
or Friday afternoon clubhouse.
That's right.
All right.
Did.
Neat story. And you're still married with her? You're still with her today?
Still married to this day.
Congratulations.
And presumably will be still tomorrow.
Till tomorrow. Good job. Anything else you'd like to add?
Oh, I think not. I think that's
All right.
enough.
Fantastic. Jerry, thank you
Jump
so
for
much
me.
for being here today. Appreciate everything in your service.
It's good to see all these guys. I
Yes,
swear
isn't it?
it really is good.
Fantastic.
Miss,
Thank you.
Miss seeing them. Thank you, sir.
As we continue through time with the different members of the SEMO Vets Corps, Chi Gamma Iota, I love that XGI, Chi Gamma Iota. Got Mr. Dan Cahill with us here. He was the president and very active on the sports programs. I remember that very well, and then continued on in school and became the president of the Vets Corps. And Dan, welcome and thank you very much. Tell us a little bit about pre-Cape Girardeau and pre-military, and then bring us up to the Vets Corps.
Well, my story is a little different from everybody else. I originally came down to Cape to play football as a running back and broke my shoulder 2 years in a row. And so I was still in school for, I guess, to my junior year. And I dropped out and went to work at Chevrolet Shell making shells for Vietnam. And a friend of mine and I then worked our way out across the South and Southwest to California. And I was out there for quite a while, and my father called and told me I was drafted. So I came back.
What year was that?
1969.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, Lou Ferretti and I were inducted the same day,
Okay.
and were sent to Fort Benning, Georgia. After Fort Benning, Lou went into the infantry training, and they said I was smart enough to go to journalism class in school.
As compared to Lou.
As compared to Lou.
Yeah, of course, it didn't take too much.
Well, this is true.
Okay.
This is
We'll
true.
make sure we get that clear.
This is true. So I ended up being sent to Germany and published a small base newspaper.
Really?
And that was my experience. And then I came back to Cape after that.
And finished up your education here?
Yes.
Okay. And then how'd you get involved with with the Vet Corps?
Well, I had been in a fraternity before, when I was in school before. And when I came back, I was a little older, a lot older, and just decided, immediately went, I had known some members of the Vets Corps, Dan Piper and Jim Burke and a few other people before I went into the service.
Yeah. So you came back and met those guys and got involved with the Vet Corps.
Yes.
What was your thoughts of the Vet Corps when you first joined them?
Well, it was still a group that was sort of outside of the normal groups in school.
Amen.
It wasn't a fraternity. It wasn't like the fraternities and the sororities. It wasn't a fashion show kind of
sure.
kind of place. There were a lot of guys with longer hair and didn't really care what other people thought about how they dressed, stuff like that. We were very good athletes. We had, we won almost everything that we got into. And Pete said we did well academically. I didn't contribute to that either, I'm afraid.
You and I were in the half the class that made the other half look good.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So then you've mentioned some more activities that we got involved in. There was a flood or something that happened here. Tell us
In
about that.
1973, there was the great flood of the Mississippi River. And Dean Walker called me and said, there's some farmers in desperate shapes over in southern Illinois. They have their own levee. It wasn't a Corps of Engineers levee. It was a private levee, and they were working desperately to save it. But they were so few. Could I get some vets to go and possibly help out? So I called several guys and asked them to call several guys and call several more guys. When I got over there, it was basically family and friends and the farmers, trying to sandbag and work on the levee. And within about 3 or 4 hours, we had about 70 or 80 guys over there.
Really?
I was stunned, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
No one had ever asked the Vets Corps to do anything school-wise or community-wise before. And here all these guys just, for no reason, just came over and volunteered. And so, it was almost like they thought, the people that were over there almost thought there was a cavalry that had come to help, the bugles were blaring and the cavalry had come to help them. And they divided us into, it's a real long levee, they divided us into 2 different groups. And we went, the 2 groups, half of us sandbagged in one location and the other half went out on the levee. And the other group did that also. And to go out on the levee, we had to sign a waiver because they said that if the levee happened to break, that not only would thousands of acres and be flooded and homes be destroyed, but we would have a very long swim. That's what they told us. So they made us sign waivers to go out on the levee, and we worked through the night. And then the next day, some fraternity and sorority guys and gals came, and they stayed pretty much at the filling sandbags. And it was the vets that were out on the actually stacking things on the levee. And if you looked over here, the Mississippi River was about a foot below our feet and lapping at our feet. And over here, it was about 10 or 15 feet down. And you would think, well, if it goes, we're going too.
Oh, no kidding.
But they had a Red Cross site set up where we could go and sleep on cots and get food. Some guys went back and forth to Cape. It was a little town, I think it was Gale, Illinois, where the Red Cross had set up. It turned out that of all the levees along the Mississippi River, every levee the Corps of Engineers had, and any other levee, every one was breached. Only one levee held, and that was the one that the vets worked on out on the levee.
Neat story.
And about 2 weeks after the water receded, Dean Walker called me into his office, and I didn't know what it was, but I walked into the office, and there were 6 or 7, maybe 8 older men in bib overalls sitting in there, and they had come to thank the Vets Corps for being brave enough to go out on the levee and all the time that we spent out there.
Yeah.
We didn't tell them that Dean Walker dismissed our classes or anything like that, which he did. He said, "You guys are working over there, and you don't have to go to class." But that was a remarkable experience to see these guys come and say, "Thank you. You guys saved our farms and our land and stuff."
You'd also mentioned another award that the Vets Corps received while you were there, something about a community award. What was that all about?
Well, I approached the March of Dimes, and there was no March of Dimes walkathon in Cape Girardeau. So I approached the March of Dimes and asked them if they would allow the Vets Corps to put on a March of Dimes walkathon. And they said, "Sure, you can do that." But knowing the guys that we're part of, the Vets Corps, and we needed a little help, so we asked the Gamma Sigma service sorority if they would help us with the March of Dimes walkathon. They would handle the registration, and we would handle all the physical stuff. And we also decided to try and raise some publicity for it. So 12 of us got together, and we contacted Governor Bond in Jeff City and asked him if he would meet us on the Capitol steps. And we asked President Scully if he would send us off. So 12 of us dribbled basketballs up to Jeff City. It took us about 6 days, I think, to go the whole distance. And at times, three of us might be dribbling the basketballs, or maybe sometimes just one of us. And we had loaded a van. We planned to just camp out, and we had supplies and snacks and maybe some beer in the van. And we had a chase vehicle that would go ahead and try and arrange places for us to, campground for us to stay and find a place for us to eat. But one of the things that happened was people heard we were coming. Here's these crazy guys dribbling a basketball on the side of the highway. People would pass us and honk their horns, wave at us. And in each town that we had planned to stay in, a church or a school offered their gymnasium or their church so that we could stay there. And they also brought food to us. Hamburgers and hot dogs and pies and stuff. So even though the general public, was looking down in a way at vets at that time, there was a different group of people that, some vets were working to help the March of Dimes, and they went out of their way to help us. And we ended up meeting Bond on the Capitol steps, and Scully sent us off, and we ended up raising $7,000 to $8,000 for the March of Dimes, which was for the first time doing it here in Cape. Was quite well.
Quite well. That would be a successful fundraiser even today.
Yeah, and we also won the Ugly Man Miss Beautiful contest. And
now, you got to tell us more about that now. What was that all about?
Oh, you wouldn't believe it, but I was the ugly man.
No.
Yeah.
It's
hard to believe. Hard to believe, I know.
Yeah, that's not right.
But we also, we raised the most money. And for all the things that we did, we ended up winning the School Community Service Award.
Holy cow.
Which sort of changed the image, brought us more into the general activities of the school.
Yeah.
And the Gamma, we worked with the Ugly Man contest with the Gamma Sigma Sigmas also. And their president told me that it was the best time those girls had had in a long time.
How nice.
Because they were the ones that were, having fun also, and instead of doing all the service stuff.
So Dan, anything else you'd like to share with us about your time before, during, or after the Vets Corps?
It was just a great group of people to be with. We had a lot of laughs. We still have a lot of laughs when we get together. But that's the main aspect of it, was a camaraderie that that you shared, winning, team sports, working together. And that's another thing that happened out on the levee. There was a corps of guys who played sports and knew each other, and there were little auxiliary groups of 3 or 4 different people here and there. But when you signed that paper and went out on the levee and worked on the levee, guys that didn't even know each other, bonded, and I think that carried over to us with the other activities that we did.
Yeah, fantastic. We greatly appreciate everything you did for the Vets Corps at that time, and glad you were able to come and join us this weekend, and I wish you nothing but the best.
Thank you, thank you.
Tom is a local businessman here in Cape Girardeau and also on the Board of Regents here at SEMO. Tom, welcome, and thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about what you did before you went into the military, and then a little bit about your experience while in the military.
Well, going right into Southeast as a freshman, I started in August of '67. Figured I'd get a good head start on that. But during the short time that I was there, Uncle Sam had other plans for a lot of us. And so I went ahead and volunteered for this service and put in my time. Then came back to finish out my schooling at Southeast.
Were you originally from Cape?
I am a native of Cape Girardeau. That's right.
Finished up your degree, and then you got involved with the Vet Corps while you were here, obviously. Tell us a little bit about your involvement with them.
Okay, well, coming back, of course, you were looking for a little bit of a community support. Coming back and meeting a lot of 17, 18-year-olds just really wasn't in your group socially. So then a good friend of mine, Bill Humphreys, Bob Wolfenkaler, a few of them, told me about the Vet Corps, so I attended some of their functions there. Having just been married, it was quite an experience for being married and with the Vet Corps. I discovered you don't take your wife to the Vet Corps functions, but nevertheless,
now some of us met our wives at
well,
Vet Corps
I know, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just but it also assisted me in a support group to work your way through the paperwork, the needs, requirements for the GI Bill, and to learn that the professors, the university administration were there to help you make a success. Now, let me tell you, when we came back, if you remember, we weren't always welcomed. And largely, we were, it wasn't that we were spit on, but we were ignored. And so coming into this community environment with the Vet Corps was exactly what I needed to push me to complete my undergraduate degree.
Then you stayed in business here in Cape and then stayed active with the Vet Corps. And now, in the last few years, with the resurgence of veterans coming back to college, you've been pretty instrumental in getting something going here at the university again. Can you tell us what that is, please?
Sure. About 10 or 11 years ago, we did have a formation of a SEMO Vet Corps alumni. And from that basis, we start talking to the administration about the present veterans that are coming back and to establish them on campus. And that was the early formation of the Student Veterans Organization, the SVO. So from that time forward, we were able to help them grow, give them that support that we had, but there were some differences. And some of the differences that we had, there's some common ground, but then there were some changes. Give you an idea that this group coming back were volunteer. A lot of us coming back were either volunteer or drafted. So there's a big difference there. A lot of them had 2 to 3 tours. And you know, when we went over, it was one tour, in and out within 2 years. It's all volunteer. Of course, we were, drafted. The biggest thing, though, is we all came back as single young men. They are often coming back, they are married and have families. And that's a big challenge.
Because they were taken out of their families to have to go serve by the National Guard, correct?
Well, that's true. And I tell you what, trying to compare ourselves, the Vet Corps, with our activities to them was a bit of a challenge, but we did work it through. And now we have a very strong base up at the university. There are over 1,200 veterans and families working under the military directorship that we have up there in an area of about 2,000 square feet that gives them room to meet, to talk, to study. It's a whole different environment. They're even working on a veterans house for transitional veterans coming back to school.
That's a much larger population than when we were there, correct?
We had 10% of the total population, which is about 7,000 in my year, and now we've got about 12,000. Wow. But it's not just the veterans. They say 1,200 veterans. It's the extension with the families. So it makes it a very large gathering right there.
Where do you see this organization going? It sounds like they're getting ready to get involved with the homes. So it must be a pretty solid group of young men.
Well, there's a turnover, as you would expect there, but they have a continual commitment to make this work, to make it successful there.
All right, good. Anything else you'd like to tell us about what you see the future of the SVU?
SVO.
SVO, excuse me.
Yeah, it took me a while to figure that out too.
Okay, yeah, as compared to the Vet Corps, yeah.
Yeah, I tell you, it's a growing presence on campus, so it's not going away. And of course, war is not going to go away. We're always going to have returning veterans, and they're looking for a quality of education, the affordability, the camaraderie-ship that we have here at the university. Now, in part, they're also working with us, the SEMO Vet Corps, in a co-sponsorship, if you will, for the new Veterans Plaza, which is going to be dedicated perhaps in a couple of years. We just started the fundraising. In fact, it'll be officially given or kicked off at the homecoming that we have, and it will establish a plaza between Memorial Hall and Academic, a very highly visible location that will recognize past, present, and future veterans. And SEMO has been around since 1873. We've had students in the Spanish-American War, World War I, II, Korea, Vietnam on up, but there's not been a centralized location to recognize the veterans because of the impact they've made on not only the school, but the community, and it should be recognized. So we're moving forward with this simple recognition, a granite block with the inscriptions representing the sacrifice and the dedication that the veterans from all the armed forces and what they have to the community at Southeast.
And that's going to be introduced here this weekend at homecoming?
That's right. We'll have it on display. We have brochures. We're selling the bricks that would be the basis for the fundraiser. We should have about 120,000 into it. Right. And should finish it up, I hope, within the year, but we've got a 2-year plan on that.
Okay. Well, Tom, thank you very much for your time and for your service and for your support of the Vets Corps and your work with the SEMO on the Board of Regents. I appreciate your time very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. What an experience. What an opportunity to come back to Cape and the college and the university and visit with old friends from many years ago. I greatly appreciate each of them coming and telling their stories. Some of them I knew, some of them I didn't, but every one of them were remarkable. Greatly appreciate everything that all of them did for their service, and we look forward to continuing this friendship and relationship for many years to come. Hope you enjoyed this little episode of the Vietnam era from the Vet Corps perspective, 1967 to 2017, 50 years, and we're still moving forward.